heading south of the Mason-Dixon. This is the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Here is your host, Brian McClanahan.
Welcome back to the Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. This is your host, Brian McClanahan, and this is episode 333, covering the week of November 7th through November 11th, 2022. Glad to have you back on the program. Very glad to be here. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter, like our Gab and our Facebook page, and subscribe to our YouTube page. Our YouTube page is invaluable. We've got a lot of great material there. You can get the podcast there. You can get all of our lectures there, our Abbeville U videos. Lots of great stuff on YouTube. Also, going out to abbevilleinstitute.org, you can find all those social media accounts there. Give us that email address. We'll give you a free ebook exploring the Southern tradition. Our gift to you, free of charge, just for giving us that email address. And of course, you're going to get emails from us, usually 5 days a week, sometimes more, sometimes twice in those 5 days. Please do not unsubscribe from that email list, because that is how you find out about all of our forthcoming programs. It's how we communicate with you. It is how we fundraise. And of course, we do exist on your generous contributions alone. So if you like the Institute and all the things we do, whether it's the videos, which we'll talk about today, the podcast, which you're listening to, the website, which has all the articles, the conferences, the Zoom webinars, all the stuff we do need your financial support. So consider that tax-deductible donation. It is tax-deductible to the full extent of the law, and we appreciate all of it. I know times are tough. If you don't have $50 to give, if you can give $5. If you can give $5 a month, that means $60 a year. How much is the Southern tradition worth to you? And supporting that and trying to help promote that as much as we can, as much as humanly possible. And when we say the Southern tradition, we're not just talking about 4 years, 1861 to 1865. We do that stuff, but we're talking about 400 years of Southern history and all of its beauty, whether it's music, whether it's literature, whether it's art, whether it's politics, government, philosophy, food. These are things that we do at the Institute. We do everything, and we try to incorporate all of these things and look at it through a very broad perspective, 400 years of history. So if you like the Institute, it is the end of the year. People are making their tax preparations for 2022. Consider that tax-deductible donation. We do appreciate your support. Also, you can download the mobile app. We are working on that. We know that there's an issue with Apple right now. I'm trying to get that resolved, but it should be resolved, and you should be able to go out and get the mobile app on Apple very soon. Hopefully within a very short period of time, that'll be back up and running. So going out there and downloading the mobile app, again, free of charge. We do have to pay for that, but it's free to you. Also, you can support the Institute by going to Amazon.com and Amazon Smile. If you make us your preferred charity at Amazon Smile, every time you shop at Amazon, we get a little change out of that. So it's a painless way to support the Institute financially. We do get a little bit of money off of that. Lots of great ways to support the Institute financially. Click on the shop tab, get our logo and all kinds of cool stuff. But as always, if you're listening to the podcast, rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Give it that 5-star review. Leave a text review. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, on any of our videos on YouTube, like them and also comment on them. And hit that heart button underneath if you want to give a little money to it. Super thanks. You can donate to the Institute that way. We do appreciate all the ways that you support us. Share our material around on social media. That also helps. We've got really trying times in the United States, and one of the things we're going to start with this week, of course, is the Arlington Confederate Monument, which, of all the things the Naming Commission decided that it was under its purview to take down, this one is the most egregious. And we know that, from what I understand, there are crews that have already been established to go out and pull down the monument because the Secretary of Defense signed off on it. We know that there is still a chance that this can be stopped. We know that looking at the charge of the committee, the Naming Commission, that this was beyond their charge, that this was simply a politically motivated assault on something that they thought they could do because, well, they can take down Confederate iconography. We know this has nothing to do with a military installation. Arlington Cemetery is a cemetery, and we've heard for years, well, Confederate monuments should be in cemeteries and museums. Well, here's one in a cemetery for Confederate soldiers buried there, 400 of them. It's a literal headstone for Ezekiel Moses, who designed it, and yet we're going to tear it down. Now, if you look at the Naming Commission, they say we're going to set up scaffolds around, and we're going to not disturb any of the graves around it. We're just going to take down the monument itself. If you look at the history of the monument, though, you know that this monument was constructed in the spirit of reconciliation. It was constructed because Northerners, William McKinley, William Howard Taft, thought that this was a good idea to have some kind of monument to recognize the contributions, the valor, the heroism of the men who were buried at Arlington and the 200,000 plus Confederate soldiers who died in the war, and a spirit of healing. William McKinley, of all people, proposed this. And now, why is that important? We had a video this week that we did on this. Of course, I wrote the script and narrated it. But we had a video that talked about this. Why is William McKinley important in this process? Well, William McKinley was a major. When the war was over, he was promoted to major. He was a major in the war, fought in several battles, was actually shot at by Confederates, and he later became president of the United States. And this is the man that thought there needed to be some type of monument and also reinterring Confederate soldiers into Arlington Cemetery, because that would help promote healing and reconciliation in the United States. He proposed this in 1898, 30 years after the war is over. And this was a grand gesture. And of course, just 2 years later, Congress authorized it through legislation to have hundreds of Confederate soldiers reburied at Arlington in a different form, right, in a circle form. But look, you have to go and try to find this thing. It's not like it's front and center in Arlington Cemetery. As soon as you walk in, there's the big Confederate monument. This is in the Confederate section. And there are other sections that were designated for different groups. And this is the Confederate section. So this monument is a beautiful work of art. It was sculpted by a Jewish American. I mean, where is the Jewish community raising hell over this? You're taking this down. This is anti-Semitism. You're taking down a monument designed by a Jewish American, a foremost sculptor in the United States and also in the world, recognized throughout the world as being a great sculptor. There were people all over the world that went and looked at his work and thought it was great. And of course, he has sculptures not just at Arlington, but also in other parts of the United States and in Europe. So a world-renowned sculptor, someone who should be applauded. I mean, if this is any other Jewish American, well, this would be seen as a sign of anti-Semitism. You're taking out a monument that a Jewish American designed, is buried underneath, and you're going to say we're going to destroy this? I mean, again, where is the outrage from the Jewish community over this? We know why, because, of course, it's a Confederate. And, of course, this guy would be seen as, racist or something else. He did fight for the Confederacy. He fought at the Battle of New Market. He was at the Virginia Military Institute when the war began. But Moses Ezekiel should be celebrated throughout the United States. And he was here for decades because of this very beautiful monument. It's a work of art. But of course, to Ty Seidule and other these people that have a political axe to grind, this is all about a political agenda. They don't actually understand the real history. And Ezekiel was careful in how he portrayed the monument and what he put on it. The two things that people like Seidule and others don't like are, the first is a slave holding a baby, and there's tears running down her face as the soldier goes off to war, the Confederate soldier. And this is supposedly historical distortion. It's sanitizing slavery. It's not doing any of that. And in the video, I bring up the fact that Booker T. Washington, in his book Up From Slavery, was very open about the fact that slaves, of course, wanted to be free. Who would question this, right? Who would question that? Southerners recognized this. During the war, they started, there was starting to be some tension during the war itself, though there were no rebellions, there were no uprisings, there was no slaughter, wholesale slaughter of white women and children left behind. That didn't happen. But there was some tension. Slaves wanted to be free, and they started moving away from the plantations and the farms as they knew they could. And in some cases, this was very hurtful to Southerners. Eugene Genovese talks about this in Roll Jordan Roll. Southerners were hurt by this. They saw it as not just labor moving away, but these were people that they relied upon and that they believed were part of their families. The slaves didn't. Clearly, many of them didn't, though some would eventually come back. But of course they're going to want freedom and test their freedom. It's something that you can't deny. And the monument doesn't say anything about that. in one way or the other. That's a given. What it does do is reiterate what Booker T. Washington said in his Up From Slavery, that slaves who were left behind would have laid down their lives to protect the women and children of those farms and those plantations and protect the property of those farms and plantations, and some did. They were abused just like any other Southerner by Northern armies. And so this is a part of the war that Ezekiel is portraying. We know this happened. We know that the book Sick from Freedom has illustrated that maybe 1 million African Americans died in the South as a result of the war. And it wasn't because of cruelty on the part of the South. It was because of dislocation, starvation, disease, and a lot of that was brought on by Northerners. So we have this very complex situation for black Southerners, and the monument portrays something very accurate. Booker T. Washington, who was the most famous African American in 1906 when the monument was designed, said the exact same thing that Ezekiel put on the monument. So, I mean, what else would you put there? And of course, then there is the image of the black Confederate, which is what he is, marching off to war with the soldiers. Now, as I mentioned in the video, the Confederacy did not recognize blacks as soldiers until March of 1865. But that didn't mean blacks didn't serve in some ways. That didn't mean there weren't any black Confederates. We know there were. We know that blacks did all kinds of things to support the war effort, both free and slave. And to show that there was a black marching off with Southern soldiers was not something uncommon. This happened all the time. So he's showing an accurate depiction of what was happening at that time during the war. And who would know better than a man who actually went and fought in the war? Moses Ezekiel, Booker T. Washington, William McKinley. No one had a problem with this monument. That is until decades later when America became a much less tolerant place and became hostile not to the war, but to reconciliation. And that is the key. If you understand that David Blight in his book Race and Reunion, the book is an attack on reconciliation. Eric Foner is attacking reconciliation in his books on Reconstruction. That's what they're attacking. They're not attacking Reconstruction. They're not attacking, in many ways, the antebellum South. They don't do that. What they're attacking is people in the postbellum world who are willing to show accuracy and how things were in the United States in the 1860s. They don't like it because it doesn't fit their idea of revolution. It's not Reconstruction. It's not remaking America. I have to be clear about something too. Thad Stevens used the term Reconstruction as a complete remaking of America. Reunion was something else. That was continuing the process of union. He thought Reconstruction should be remaking America, recreating America. And that is what people like Blight and Foner are upset about. It's what people like Sigerly and Kevin Levine, who I call him, is actually Kevin Levin, but I always make fun, call him Kevin Levine, because Bruce Levine and Kevin Levine, they look almost exactly alike and they say the same thing. So it's just putting the two together. Bruce Levine, Kevin Levin, you could have Bruce Levin and Kevin Levine. It's the same thing. Northerners who want to gain fame because they want to deny, these are black history deniers, they want to deny black history in America, an accurate black history in America. They want to deny it for a political agenda. And people can't see through this. They don't want to see through it because it doesn't fit with their take it down mentality. And that's the sad thing about all of it. In fact, Booker T. Washington said that monuments to the best of Confederate soldiers and best of Southerners would help heal the South and create better race relations, not the other way around. And we're seeing it. The more you see the monuments taken down, the more you see these things happen. It's not healing that's going on. It's about power, and it's about an agenda, and one side winning over the other side. These monuments weren't about anybody winning. It was simply saying we have this situation, we're going to honor Confederate dead. And particularly in cemeteries, none of those should ever be taken down. We're going to honor Confederate dead. We're going to honor the men that fought and served and died because families were wrecked by this. And what better way to do it than through a monument? There's also, a picture. If these monuments were so dangerous and so oppressive, and people were just so shocked by them, didn't want to be around them, there's a picture that was used in a book, an anti-monument book, of black Southerners sitting in Mississippi, sitting on the base of a Confederate monument during a trial. Okay, think about that. These monuments are so offensive to these people, and it meant that blacks could never be around this courthouse. They're literally sitting on it during a trial. So how does that fit? How does that narrative fit? I mean, nobody can really explain this. If these people were so offended by that monument, and yet they're sitting at the base talking, I mean, no big deal. How does this work? It's abject stupidity. It's clown world these people live in. But the sad thing about the Arlington Confederate Monument, it's not just going to be taken down. There's really no defenders of it in Congress. And that's what the first two pieces of the week talked about. We just had an election, of course, and we know in the South, Republican Party is ascendant. You know, the Republican Party holds power. It has the most power. The Democrat Party is pretty weak throughout the South. But the Republican Party is seen as the defender of the South. And yet, the monument and the naming commission could have been eliminated. This naming commission could have never happened if Republicans had held firm and not voted to override Donald Trump's veto of the naming commission. Donald Trump vetoed the bill that created the naming commission. And Republicans, in crushing majorities, voted to override that veto. Why? Because we got to support the troops. We got to support the military. The Democrats inserted this naming commission thing into the bill, and Republicans did not object. They should have. But you see, because they're too worried about supporting the troops and funneling money into the United States military, they picked their constituents. And what Southern, and there's a number, I mean, dozens and dozens of Southern congressmen who voted for this. What those people said is, you don't matter. If you're a Confederate descendant and you're worried about this, you don't matter. What matters now is, giving billions of dollars to Boeing to create some new weapons system. That's what matters. You don't matter anymore. And it's a wonder that Southerners continue to sign up and fight for this military, and join the military in large numbers. We talked about that before with the Lafayette Lee piece, Dark Age Patriotism, a couple of weeks back. Here he is, a veteran, and he is wondering, now questioning his commitment and going into the military. A lot of soldiers are disillusioned. And they're disillusioned because they realize that what they're doing and what they're fighting for doesn't fit their own values. And so Southerners have to start asking this question. I mean, does the United States military reflect my values? Does it reflect my positions on things? Southerners make up 46% of the United States military. Should they continue to do so? Or should they just kind of leave it to the North if we're just going to have a situation where the United States military is going to be completely devoid of anything that honors the South? Well, then why would you sign up for that military? It's a big question. I think a lot of Southerners are asking that question now more than before. More than ever before, they're asking that question. Or you could, in 1898, they were willing to go sign up and join up in large numbers just to show their patriotism. And I think what's happening now is that has all been blown apart because they're starting to question the value of empire and the value of this very left-wing military that we have now. It's something that I think is going to become much more pronounced as we move forward in the coming years. Our Southerners are going to continue to do it. We know the Republicans are always the stupid party. And both the pieces, whether it's the piece by Paul Yarborough or whether it's the piece by Ron Kennedy, both of these men are questioning the commitment of the Republican Party to supporting the Southern tradition. And, of course, Kennedy, says, well, I mean, you need to go out and get involved and try to get involved in these local things that you can do to try to affect change in your area. We know that monuments, we've seen when local people get involved and they start advocating to try to keep monuments up and protect cultural items like monuments, It works. It works at times. It doesn't always work, but it does work at times. And so he recommends that people go out and just ignore the fact that we've got Republicans, red wave, which of course didn't happen. But we predicted it on this podcast, and we talked about that, how it was going to be a ripple, because a lot of people, conservatives, don't trust the Republican Party anymore, and rightly so. They're concerned about the direction of the United States and what the Republican Party is really willing to do to fight. But regardless, we've got this situation where the Republican Party is not really the defender of anything that's true and valuable in the Southern tradition. It never has been politically. And so Kennedy and Yarborough are recommending that you take action at your state and local level and try to get involved in where you can and try to protect the South and Southern tradition and Southern culture where you can. And that would be, of course, also supporting the Abbeville Institute. And as we point out in the video, if you're upset about the monument, call your congressman. Leave a message. Say, look, I'm not happy about this monument being taken down. I don't think that we should be removing a work of art or a literal headstone for a Jewish American. The Republican Party likes to say, they're trying to be against anti-Semitism, and they point this stuff out. But here they are supporting the removal of a monument sculpted by a Jewish American, and that's his literal headstone. You can't make this stuff up. So we can point these things out, and I think we do try to do a very good job of that. But it does come down to, as Kennedy talks about, action on your part to affect change where you can. So if you're listening to this podcast and you think you can make a call, you think you can get involved in some things at your state and local level to try to preserve, whether it's a monument, a symbol, promote the Southern tradition in one way or another, and your own way, whether it's, writing for a blog, going out and talking to your friends, having some kind of event that would promote the South, promote Southern culture, whether it's literature or music or food. Do these kind of things. Do the things that matter to try to promote this stuff in your own community. And of course, we know that there's a tremendous amount of opposition to the South. The piece on Friday talks about that with the Southern accent. Sarah Sass wrote this piece, Hollywood Hates the South, Southern Accents Edition, and how you'll find a better Southern accent out of Europeans than you will out of any Americans. Now, the conclusion is interesting. She says, while the South remains elusive to Hollywood, this is a strength. The true nature of the South remains out of reach of a money-making machine, less concerned with accuracy than image. So the South remains hidden. She does not reveal herself on camera, and she certainly wouldn't think of doing so to a group that could not say, hey, y'all, with any authenticity. I found out, I was doing something with my own McClanahan Academy last night, and I found out that y'all now has been appropriated by people on the left because of the gender-neutral pronoun element of it. They can't spell it right. They can't do that. But they've appropriated this as a way to get around the he, her, him, she, these kind of things. And so y'all now is being used. Cultural appropriation. Who's going to push back on this, though? Southerners don't care. But this is culture. If any other group, would be cultural appropriation. You can't use that if you can't use y'all if you're from Connecticut. It doesn't work. You can't use y'all if you're from Massachusetts or California. You can't use that. Now, on the other hand, you could look at it like, it shows you how beautiful the Southern tradition is. Southerners are always y'all could be singular, plural, male, female, it doesn't matter. Southerners just recognize people. And, it's beautiful in that way if you think about it. But I found this fascinating that this has actually happened. And the people that said this, they're on the pulse of these things more than I am. But how y'all has become part of this movement, this pronoun-neutral movement in the progressive left. I think it's funny in a lot of ways. But certainly, y'all is it's a beautiful thing. So the South, because it can't always be co-opted or understood, remains, as Sass says, elusive. It's hidden. Maybe that's a good thing. As you start thinking in these ideas, thinking down to the base and your state and your local community and what you can do to try to preserve the Southern tradition. As you do that, maybe that's a good thing that it remains hidden and elusive. You can preserve it better that way. And of course, when you talk about the complexity of the South and the diversity of the South, and we had a great piece on Thursday, Ropes and Swimming Holes, about the Southern tradition. This is by William Platt. It's a little story. One of these stories that would fit with Faulkner. And in race relations that would not fit with modern sensibilities. They wouldn't fit with how Americans think about the South. But in this way, it shows you that things are a little more complex in the South than what most people admit or even know. And how many black Americans, particularly on an individual level, were respected in the South. I've had people say it over and over again, even during the period when you had the most volatility in the South and the most violence, that group relations were bad, but individual relations were always good. And you had a mutual understanding and respect for people on individual levels in the South, and that was still the case even during this very difficult time in Southern history in the middle of the 20th century. And I think this piece is, indicative of that you still had that. But that's not the story that people are going to get about the South. They're going to get the Bull Connor, water cannons, all those kind of things. And we know that that stuff happened. I mean, it's there. You can't deny it. It's right in front of you. We know that there are parts of the Southern tradition that are not very pleasing, that or at least Southern history, because is that really the Southern tradition? If you ask Clyde Wilson about these kind of things, he'll say it's Yankee. And we know that Jim Crow was originated in the North, and that the things that people are doing that are somehow the Southern tradition now aren't really the Southern tradition at all. That kindness has always been a trait of the South. Hospitality. Genteel attitudes. You go back and read Pollard, for example, and he creates a dichotomy between Yankees and Southerners. But even going back to the colonial period, Southerners were known for a different type of mannerism. It was a real gentlemanly conduct. And that went all the way back to this notion of an aristocracy, the gentlemen of Europe, right, of England. And Southerners certainly saw themselves in this way and tried to conduct their lives. They didn't always make it, of course. They didn't always achieve that very high ideal, but they tried. And this was traditional. This was handed down. This is what people did. And you had to try to meet those expectations from family members. And again, I use Clyde, great supporter of the Institute, who had his grandmother used to tell him that we just don't do those things. We don't do those things. We don't do the things that would bring your family into disrepute. That's going back, it's very Republican, Roman in that way. You didn't do things that brought your family into disrepute. You tried to be mindful of your family history and who your family was, and you tried to honor them through your own conduct and actions. Because you didn't want them to be tarred and with your bad deeds. Reflects on the family, reflects on the parents, the grandparents. And so Southerners from 200 years ago would look at us as their descendants and what we're doing and say that's a very, very bad reflection of what we were. It's a very bad reflection of what Southern society was. And you could say this just in America in general. I mean, Americans used to be different, and they would have some pretty nasty things to say about us in modern society and the way we conduct our affairs and how we do things and the things we say and the way we act. Washington, again, in saying that we should have monuments to the best of Southern character, it wasn't just about worshiping these people. It wasn't about worshiping Robert E. Lee as Robert E. Lee. It was about understanding who Lee was as a man, and that high character that Lee exhibited should be then something everyone should emulate as a Southern man, not just a Southern man, but an American man. And again, that's lost in all these things that take it down and hide and do away with, and tearing down these people and tearing down their character. And that's the unfortunate part of all of this. The South, as a beautiful tradition, as a beautiful culture, again, every culture has its negatives. Every culture has its bad stuff. You can't say that there's one that doesn't. But overall, if you weigh in the balance, the Southern tradition would be, I think, on the whole and balance, better than its bad stuff. And we know this because Americans wanted to emulate it through much of American history. The Take It Down movement, the Arlington Cemetery, symbols, images, whatever it is, all of that, the whole point is to remove what is seen as a very traditional obstacle in American society. And that's why they're doing it. It's only because of politics. And it's sad. It's a sad commentary on modern American society. All right. Hope you enjoyed this Week in Review at the Abbeville Institute. Until next time, good day.